So I figured I would just give a brief summary of the update, and then you guys can kind of just ask me whatever you want about the state of No Rest for the Wicked.
Sounds good.
For those of you who don't know, it's a early access game, which I would classify just like with Force Gaming saying, I wish there was two labels for early access, polished early access versus early access. So this is one of the categories that I would call polished early access. You have a level cap of 30. You've got like 100 odd weapons, and the weapons dictate your play style, but not the skills that you can equip. And so
Isn't
much
that
more.
what beta was for?
I feel like it should be like alpha access and beta access or something like that.
I
like
agree. I agree with those terms. The problem is I think within game development and marketing, they've marketed betas as like all it is just a preview, hype driven beta.
Isn't that a demo? Didn't we have all of these words?
We've had these words.
Like we don't have to reinvent English here, right?
Right. It's a beta. The game launches next week. It's like, guys, it's not a beta.
Use them.
That's not.
Yeah. The only one, as a kind of just an aside, the First Descendant, they actually used the beta label correctly because they had multiple betas spanning over like a year and a half, 2 years, taking the feedback, and then people really enjoy their game.
Did people get upset at all? Like, because the thing is, okay, because I'm just curious if because what would happen is if you market, if you market now with the correct term, people get upset because their expectation is incorrect, right? Like if you created something early access, but it was like an early alpha, people are like, this isn't early access.
Well, and that's PAX A. Like PAX A would be, and they say they're in alpha. We're still in alpha. We're not in beta yet, and that
aren't you like a Steve, what's his name, where you're coming out and making statements all the time so that people have a general idea whether or not to believe your stuff?
The hope is there. But anyway, so I would say with No Rest though, high quality, like they really it's definitely that beta tier, but it's content. It needs more story, needs more things like that. Obviously, that's the frustration from some of the community. This update did not include additional story or brand new zones to go and explore, but they did heavily focusing on their Crucible, which is a roguelike now. And for those of you who aren't aware, I have a horrible addiction to roguelikes because that one more round just becomes a huge thing. So just like with Vampire Survivors is what this update is. I literally looked up and I was like, I wouldn't have stopped playing. I was listening to one of those Manosphere podcasts talking about work out, get enough water, go to sleep. And they said, go to sleep. And I look up at the time, I'm like, oh, it's midnight. And I usually try to be in bed by 9. And I was like, I sat down at 8:00 with the intention of playing this from 8 to 9. And it is now midnight. I think I might have a problem here. So it introduced that. And I absolutely am head over heels, even more than I've been. This seems to be an update that's going to consume a lot of hours, which is fun. And the fact that it's also in GeForce Now means I can play, downstairs and probably too long. So hopefully I'm not sleep deprived by tomorrow. But what do you guys, what would be some really good questions that you guys would have for me about the state of the game?
So first question, so I guess most broadest question is, I've had this game pitched to me, and from what I've seen is that Diablo with some Souls-like elements. How true is that?
It's more Souls-like than it is Diablo. In fact, I have gone to play Diablo 4, the latest season, a little bit, and I tell you, it overshadows Diablo in so many ways because the combat is the highlight, because it's not just about spamming your abilities. Regular enemies can come in if you're not you want to know, you want to look at timing, and so it has a challenge to it that keeps you engaged, so that even if you're running in the open world and you've leveled up and you've got really good gear, you can melt things down, but you also got to be very well aware of they blocked your attack and now they got you on the defensive and they're knocking you around. And then all of a sudden a buddy comes out from, hey, I'm gonna, another, you fall into a category where you're now outnumbered. It's a very skills based ARPG.
That's awesome, because
in that isometric way. Yes.
Like for me, my big problem with Diablo and a lot of the other Diablo likes the action RPGs is there's just not enough skill expression for the fun part to me. So so that makes me
started in Diablo 3. They started to move towards this rotation based method where there became an optimal method, and the method was to rinse repeat. And it was done in the name of balance. It didn't achieve balance, but it was done in the name of balance. As opposed to just letting games be fun, like is it easier to kill bugs or robots? I don't know. Which one's fun? And so like there's just I think we've lost that in some of the big AAAs. You know, I can't speak on behalf of, to say we've lost that in gaming a lot of times is not that I don't know that I'm actually educated enough on gaming as a whole to speak to that. I think
there's been some research.
I think lately there's been some real strength coming out of the indie market that tells me like when we say, oh, well, they're not doing that anymore, we're speaking about the AAA and we're ignoring an entire group of devs who are like, that's all I've been doing.
Yeah, I'm very tapped into that side lately, like the past like 5+ years.
Games that are under $20 because they're crushing. So, you know,
and have been for a while. Like honestly,
that's what's crazy is something about the market, at least within. I can only consume like English speaking outlets. At least within a lot of the English speaking media that I cover is like there's almost something seen as less than about games that are under a certain price point.
Yeah,
like well, if they're only worth 10, they're probably not very good. And then all it takes is like buying one Vampire Survivors before you're like, should I only be buying games that are $3?
See, that was the benefit of being broke. Is like
I could buy
afford those games. So,
like, does somebody have a bundle where I just get a new one of these every 8 days?
There's enough of them out there.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're seeing.
Price per year.
Yeah. That's what we're seeing within the gaming, the innovation and that kind of vision where they're not trying to be the be all end all, have the highest fidelity graphics, all voice acted, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, they really lean in on focusing on the gameplay. I listened to the Hot Ones episode with Ryan Reynolds and with why am I drawing a blank? Wolverine.
Hugh Jackman.
Hugh Jackman. Clip in shorts. I haven't.
Hugh Jackman, and so we had Wolverine, we had Deadpool, and they were on Hot Ones, and it was wonderful. It was such a great interview. But he talked about, Ryan brought up the concept of having unlimited money and having all these, like, it doesn't mean that the art or the thing is better. Sometimes it's that having those restrictions are actually much better for you and for your vision.
Necessity is the mother of invention. I'll tell you what. I mean, not to say, but this is kind of going back a little. You want enough resources that things are not like everyone's failing and exhausted and tired and feels insecure. But you don't want so much that people aren't having to come up with solutions. Yeah,
I've heard that from multiple interviews out of that industry. They've talked about how like some of the best things that they've made was when they only had access to one camera. It's like, this is the camera we're going to use. Like having an entire trailer of equipment didn't necessarily make the shots better.
Right.
It all of a sudden obligated them to use all this equipment. And they're like, there was some advantage to when it's like, well, we're going to have to film this whole thing today. And like, we're going to get what we're going to get because we don't have 6 weeks on set. So
good at editing. For No Rest for the Wicked, so I guess as someone who like has played a lot of roguelikes, but I don't tend to like enjoy roguelike for the sake of it, roguelikes for the sake of it. How much does the game either have currently or is promised to have for someone like me, who's totally fine also with having like a 20-hour or whatever good quality experience and then being done?